Hello friends, I welcome you all in this exciting training session being conducted by TNV Academy. Today in this session we will discuss about clause 4.3 of ISO 45001-2018 which talks about determining the scope of occupational health and safety management system. So let's get going and start our discussion. Let me explain you that what we will be covering in this session. In this session, we will discuss about the requirements of clause 4.3 which states that an organization should determine the scope or the boundaries to which the occupational health and safety management system will be applicable. Now, let us understand about the internal references taken by clause 4.3 of ISO 45001-2018. As far as clause 4.3 of ISO 45001-2018 is concerned, then for understanding its requirements, you should be aware about the requirements stated in clause 4.1 and 4.2 of ISO 45001-2018. Also, clause 4.3 takes reference from Annex A defined within ISO 45001-2018. Annex A lists out the definitions and meaning of the terms used in this international standard so that no misinterpretation is done while implementing the requirements of ISO 45001-2018. Now, let me tell you what are the takeaways of this session. At the end of this chapter, you will be able to understand what is scope and how an organization can determine the same with reference to ISO 45001-2018. How an organization defines the applicability of occupational health and safety management system within its framework. How an organization determines the activities through which occupational health and safety performance can be impacted. So, let's begin our discussion with a brief definition of scope and then we will discuss the requirement of clause 4.3 in detail. In simple words, we can say that scope is a collective information of the activities that are performed by an organization. It actually tells what products or services do the organization offer to its end users. The scope of an organizational occupational health and safety management system actually tells that where and for what activities it is applicable within the organization and to which activities it is not. If we talk about ISO 45001-2018, then it says that an organization has to determine the limits to which the occupational health and safety management system will be applicable, which includes its activities, processes, and functions. An organization has the freedom and flexibility to define the boundaries and applicability of the occupational health and safety management system. The boundaries and applicability may include the whole organization or a specific part of the organization. As long as the top management of that part of the organization has its own functions, responsibilities, and authorities for establishing an occupational health and safety management system. Now, let us discuss the requirements of clause 4.3 in detail. The clause 4.3 of ISO 45001-2018 states that the organization shall determine the boundaries and applicability of the occupational health and safety management system to establish its scope. When determining this scope, the organization shall: Point 1. Consider the external and internal issues referred to in clause 4.1. Point 2. Take into account the requirements referred to in clause 4.2. Point 3. Take into account the planned or performed work-related activities. The occupational health and safety management system shall include the activities, products, and services within the organization's control or influence that can impact the organization's occupational health and safety performance. The scope shall be available as documented information. The credibility of the organization's occupational health and safety management system will depend upon the choice of the boundaries. The scope should not be used to exclude activities, products, and services that have or can impact the organization's occupational health and safety performance, or to evade its legal requirements and other requirements. The scope is a factual and representative statement of the organization's operation included within its occupational health and safety management system boundaries that should not mislead interested parties. The scope of the occupational health and safety management system must be defined and determine what parts of the workplaces associated with the plant, factory, and the office administration are included in the system. Once the scope is defined, an organization must include in the occupational health and safety management system the activities, products, and services that it controls or influences and that can impact its occupational health and safety performance. The scope of the occupational health and safety management system can include the whole organization or specific and identified functions or sectors of the organization. Therefore, if the organization makes a statement that it conforms to ISO 45001:2018 standard, then it must make the scope of the management system available so that interested parties clearly understand what parts of the organization are covered. The scope of the management system should include everything under the organization's control or influence that could impact its occupational health and safety performance. It should be noted that under no circumstances should the scope be used to exclude activities, products, or services that have or could have the potential to impact the organization's occupational health and safety performance or to evade its legal and other requirements. An inappropriately narrow or exclusive scope could undermine the credibility of the organization's occupational health and safety management system with its interested parties and reduce its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of the occupational health and safety management system. Once the organization has identified the boundaries of the scope, it should start defining the scope with a multi-step process, which is stated below. Step number 1. Identify the preliminary scope. A representative group of management representatives should be appointed to discuss the initial version of the scope. Step number 2. Review the preliminary scope. The second step should be reviewing and refining the preliminary scope. It might be a case that in this step, few units inside and outside the preliminary scope can be included or excluded. It is important that while reviewing the preliminary scope, all functions that are necessary for supporting the business activities included in the scope should be considered. Step number 3. Drafting the final scope. This step involves a third review of the reviewed scope identified in the second step. All the final inclusions and exclusions are made in this step, and a final scope is drafted and defined precisely. Step number 4. Formal approval of scope. In this step, the final drafted scope is presented to the top management for its official approval. The organization should maintain the scope of the occupational health and safety management system as documented information and make it available to interested parties. There are several methods for doing so. For example, using a written description, inclusions on a site map, an organizational diagram, a web page, or posting a public statement of its conformity. When documenting its scope, the organization should consider using an approach that identifies the activities or processes involved, the products or services offered, and the location where they occur. Below is an example of a scope defined by an organization which is into manufacturing of lift controllers and power supplies. Our health and safety management system address all employees and customers affected by the manufacture and installation of our lift controllers and power supplies to our customers. The occupational health and safety management system describes how the company requirements are to be addressed throughout its operations and addresses the requirements of ISO 45001:2018. So friends, I hope you are clear with the requirements of subclause 4.3 of ISO 45001:2018. So let's move forward and discuss the other important components of this session. So now we will learn about the mandatory documents that an organization has to maintain while meeting the requirements of subclause 4.3. As far as clause 4.3 of ISO 45001:2018 is concerned, that an organization should keep documented information about its scope which it has finalized. The documented scope should be readily available at the time of audit. Now, let us understand how to write non-conformity for clause 4.3 of ISO 45001:2018. It can be understood through an example of sample NC given in AFAR, Audit Findings Action Report 1. And last but not the least, let us understand the common mistakes which auditors do while performing audit under the subclause 4.3 of ISO 45001:2018. Mistake number 1. Auditors ask irrelevant question for the organization which does not relate with the organization to be audited. Mistake number 2. Sometimes auditors start thinking for the option, while auditor need to understand the client process and to decide if the client can achieve the result of the MSS through their own process. Mistake number 3. Auditor start consulting activities. Mistake number 4. Auditor start expecting document and records in clause where this may not be mandatory requirement. Mistake number 5. Auditor start asking for the documents that are not relevant for the requirements of the clause or standard. For example, GST registration, FSSAI registration, etc. Dear friends, we have now come to the conclusion of this training session. See you soon with an exciting new topic. Till then, goodbye.